Good morning, 4G. Today we're going to look at propaganda in Animal Farm. So what is propaganda? Something written or spoken with the intention of making people believe what you want them to believe. The aim of propaganda is to persuade people to accept beliefs and facts without question. So there are many uses of propaganda. It is often used in wartime when it's necessary to boost the morale of your country while at the same time persuading the enemy that they are losing. And propaganda can take the form of a poster, leaflet, speech, song, broadcast, any device that carries information. So I'm going to show you some war posters now that were actually genuinely used in the First and Second World War in the UK to convince young men to enlist, to get as many people joined up to become soldiers as possible. Who's absent? Is it you? This is designed to make you feel bad as you walk along the street and see that poster because you haven't joined up, whereas everybody else has. Here's another one. And at the bottom is a child sitting on her dad's lap, and he's looking a little bit concerned. And at the bottom it says, "Daddy, what did you do in the Great War?" And we take that to understand that he didn't actually fight in the Great War. And what's he going to tell his children? Because he hasn't been part of the war effort. And he should feel guilty. Here's another one. "Women of Britain say go." The women were portrayed as being supporters of the war and advocates for the young men to go off and fight for their countries. The kitchen is the key to victory. So this wasn't about joining up. This was about rationing the food that you eat. And so these kinds of posters were also hung around England during the war to encourage people to be a little bit careful about their food consumption. And look at this one. "Destroy this mad brute. Enlist." And this is actually the US Army, a poster that they put out in the United States. This is a German hat, and the German soldier is being portrayed as a ravenous, raging animal who is capturing this innocent woman who represents America. She's the woman from the Statue of Liberty, perhaps. She's Lady Liberty, and she's being captured and destroyed by this evil brute. And so this is propaganda to make young men join up. Here's some more communist propaganda, which is getting closer to what we're talking about in Animal Farm. "Join the Communist Party. This way to progress." If you don't join the Communist Party, you won't be encouraging progression. And then "Vote Communist." Many propaganda posters, communist propaganda posters, depicted the worker with their sickle and their hammer. That's the hammer and sickle of communist Russia, in a sort of heroic form, strong, muscular, standing tall, making factories work, working in the countryside to encourage farms to be successful. The worker was the heroic figure, and they're suggesting that if you want a healthy, thriving nation, you need to vote communist, where everybody will work together equally. So we know from Animal Farm that it's not quite as simple as that. And we're going to just have a look at this. So propaganda in Animal Farm. "Squealer. is in charge of Napoleon's propaganda machine. Every time something happens which raises questions among the animals, Squealer uses his skill with language to persuade them everything is fine. He's also likened to Joseph Goebbels, who was the Nazi propagandist in the story. So what I want you to do today is to read these different types of propaganda. How exactly does Squealer use language to convince and persuade his audience that everything that's happening is good and it's the way it should be, and Napoleon is the man to follow? So there's all these different methods, and I'm going to leave you to read those carefully yourself. They are attached in the resources box below. Just an example though: lying, pinpointing the enemy. So there's examples of all these different things. You can probably think of some outright lies straight off from your knowledge of the book, but there's all these different means of using propaganda: fear, repetition, assertion, selection, generalities, name calling, rhetorical questions. So your task today is to read all these carefully so that you understand them and you can identify some of these different methods of propaganda, and then reread these 3 speeches. Should be 3 speeches. The milk and apple speech at the end of chapter 3, Snowball's expulsion speech at the end of chapter 5, and Snowball's betrayal speech in the middle of chapter 7. And using that types of propaganda sheet above, identify as many of types of propaganda used by Squealer in these 3 speeches that you can. So set out your book with these mini headings. So under lying, I want you to come up with an example and a quote for each of these different types of propaganda. And these quotes can come from any of those 3 speeches. And you'll see how much of what Squealer says is pure propaganda to support Napoleon's cause.